Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Survivor 47 following episode 8, which was another kind of strange episode from an edit perspective, considering how much of the episode the auction took up, but also some strange things that kind of muddy the waters a bit, but we'll get that soon enough. But we have 11 players to talk about, and so waste some more time, let's go into the video. So starting off at number 11, we have the latest boot from the season, and here we have Sierra. And this is not too surprising here, considering we had already gotten the setup last week to Andy flipping on Sam and Sierra. And while I can tell that Andy was more focused on Sam than anything else, I feel like Sierra was just as likely to be collateral damage here, considering a lot of people saw Sam as more of a shield. Not to mention that Sierra was continuing to underestimate Andy in this episode and is continuing to link up with Sam. So again, it felt pretty destined that Sam and Sierra would be broken up here, and that Sierra's association with Sam would ultimately be our downfall by the end of it. And if we're looking at Sierra more generally, I feel like Sierra was kind of all over the place for me, where there were certainly points early on where I felt like she could have been this dark horse to win, where I felt like her premiere wasn't too bad, and I feel like there were a couple of episodes in the pre-merge that were fine for her, but I feel like by the time of the merge, she was kind of drawing dead considering the whole Annika situation, and I feel like with her never fully breaking away from Sam, and with her content kind of mellowing out by the merge, I feel like she was kind of destined to not win, and considering the position she was in the game, it didn't shock me that she was taken out here. And from a gameplay perspective, I mean, I feel like Sierra's game was kind of fine at the end of the day, or while there are definitely things you can criticize with it, where you have the fact that her and Sam were clearly this duo, and Sierra's clearly the person to be sniped out to keep Sam around as a shield. I feel like her game outside of that wasn't as bad as other boots on the season so far, but that's where we are at this point, though obviously Sierra is now out of the game to where she's here at number 11. And before we continue, I am once again partnering up with Russell Muscle TV to promote Idle Plays. Idle Plays is an online shop where you can purchase Survivor puzzles and practice them. That way you can potentially be the next challenge beast on Survivor 47 and beyond. In this season, we have creator lockers. These are special bundles handpicked by myself and other Survivor YouTubers, along with creator trading cards. If you purchase my puzzle, you can get your hands on the Labyrinth Ball puzzle, the Slide puzzle, and Spencer's puzzle from Survivor Cambodia. If you want to take home these puzzles and more, feel free to use my link in the description or use my affiliate code, Survivor Gumball, and start prepping now. And with that, we have 10 people left in the game to talk about. As usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. But number 10, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on, is Sam. And once again, I do have Sam here at the very bottom, as he's pretty much on the bottom of the game right now, where we literally see the entire tribe flipping on Sam and Sierra here to take one of them out, loses his closest ally in Sierra, and is now kind of being used as a shield, where yes, there is a case to be made that he could be kept around for a couple more rounds due to him being this obvious threat, but I feel like at this point that's really all he can really bank on, and I feel like it wouldn't shock me if he's out from the final 8 or final 7 rounds from a gameplay perspective. But even from an edit perspective, I feel like he's kind of drawing dead as well, where he once again underestimated Andy, and sure enough, Andy does eventually flip on him, and he's kind of just left out there as well. So I feel like the show is kind of setting up Sam's downfall for a while at this point, and while he could survive a couple more rounds, I just don't see how he wins the game at this point, and I feel like he's probably going to be taken out at some point. So for those reasons, I still have him at the very bottom at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have another person who I've been pretty confident is not winning, and they're still not winning, but number 9 we do have Gabe. Now admittedly this was a bit of a quieter episode for Gabe at the end of the day here, and you can argue that this was a good episode for him, where he talks about wanting to get out Sierra, and he eventually gets his way there, which is all pretty good. But at the end of the day, I feel like he's still not set up to win. He's still someone who I think is too overconfident, someone who's been presented as a clear villain this season, someone who's clearly underestimating other people in a spot to where he comes off as overconfident. Again, I feel like I'm not feeling the greatest sense of Gabe from a storytelling perspective, but he is at least in a good position right now. I'll give him that. And that's the main reason he is above Sam, but at the end of the day, neither of them are winning, which is why he's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have another person remaining around the same spot as last week, but we do have Saul. And admittedly, this was kind of an interesting episode for Saul here, where we do see him talking about his decision to give Rachel the safety without power, and talking about how he wants to build Saul's secret angels. We also get this weird confessional from Kyle about how he seems to like Saul a lot, and I feel like this episode showed a more personable side to Saul, which is pretty good here, but I just feel like it's too little too late. I feel like at this point, there are so many other people that are more important to the overall story of the season. Even with his relationship with Rachel, a lot of it felt circumstantial, where obviously he was going to talk about his relationship with Rachel, considering he just saved her. In this episode, Rachel was a target and he had to weigh in on potentially saving Rachel. And while that ends up going through, I feel like that had little to do with what Saul was doing. And I feel like Saul didn't really get much credit for saving Rachel in this spot. So I feel like this episode didn't really move the needle for Saul in terms of his winner chances, even though we got some fun moments from him along the way, which is why he's here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have someone who I mentioned not too long ago, but we do have Kyle. And Kyle's a player I'm not entirely sure what to make of, considering it seems like he isn't getting as much content as you would expect from someone like him. But really a lot of his content comes early on, where he talks about how he likes Saul, and while that is unnecessary content and could lead to something, I feel like it's just kind of whatever, kind of just him talking about how Saul's like a quirky guy and a jokester. Beyond that, you have his whole moment at the auction where he eats chicken wings, even though he's a vegetarian, which is something like that. And then you have him winning his 3rd immunity of the season, which, again, like a lot of it feels pretty baseline. I feel like none of it really is propping him up in the edit. And you also have him being talked about as a threat, where you have Teeny talking about before the challenge how Kyle would be this big, easy target to take out if he loses immunity. And even after immunity, you have him talking about how winning his 3rd immunity in a row is pretty bad, and that he'll probably be a target if he ends up losing another one. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of it, and you could argue that these are just minor seeds that could lead to Kyle like going on this big comp run later on. But really, I think there are just other people who I feel a bit more confident about compared to Kyle at this point. And I feel like with him not really popping off as much as you would expect or as much as you would like for a winner in the post-merge, I did decide to leave him behind at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have another person who I'm not entirely sure what to make of at this point, but number 6 we do have Genevie. And Genevie has been getting a bit more to do as well, where we saw her early on in the episode talking about how her and Andy want to potentially work with the Tukus to take out the Gadas instead. So she does get a bit of gameplay content here, but I think a major problem for Genevie is that she doesn't get her way with the vote, where she talks quite a bit about how she wants to target Rachel due to Rachel being like this charismatic and threatening player. But not only does Rachel not go, she doesn't even vote for Rachel, where instead she joins on the Sam and Sierra split plan. So I feel like the fact that she talked openly on the show about targeting Rachel only to not do so is pretty bad for Genevie at this point, and a big reason why I have her relatively low on the list compared to the top contenders. But even so, like, she is still someone who could make a deep run, as she is at least being shown being a big player, even though I don't think it's translating to her getting her way at all opportunities. But for now, I do have her here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone who I have downgraded at this point, considering their episode here. By number 5, we do have Sue. And at this point, I think I'm out on Sue. I don't think she's winning the game. And admittedly, I know some people were out on her last week after she got 0 confessionals, which obviously was a knock, but I wanted to wait one more week to see if she would get to explain herself here and really turn things around, but that simply doesn't happen, where we get to the beginning of the episode and Sue has nothing to say about the Tiana vote at all, which I think is a massive red flag for Sue, considering that Tiana was his clear source of adversity for Sue during the pre-merge, where you had Tiana being suspicious of Sue for finding the idol in the pre-merge. And I feel like that could have been a massive opportunity for Sue to really prop herself up, talking about how she took out this person that was onto her, even though Tiana refuted that in her exit interviews. But at least the show is presenting it as this conflict, and the fact that they don't take the opportunity to prop up Sue for this is such a major red flag for me. And even beyond this, her only content comes after winning the immunity challenge, where she gets this really over-the-top confessional about how, like, she's an older woman and that if she can do it, then anyone can do it, and that you should play Survivor, which, again, just felt very over-the-top and circumstantial there. So really, I'm just getting down and out on Sue, and at this point, if I had to guess, she's probably a losing finalist. I think that would make a lot of sense for her based off her edit, based off of the way that the game is going right now. So at this point, I'm feeling kind of out on Sue, which is why she's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have another person who I'm very conflicted on at this point, but we do have Rachel. And Rachel has been a pretty big character over these last couple episodes, which I'm actually kind of surprised by, all things considered, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. Where on one hand, you can argue that this is good content for her, where now that she's been on the bottom, like she's sort of being like this scrappy underdog that's able to like slide her way through despite her being this big threat, which could be pretty good for her. But on the other hand, I do feel like a lot of it feels circumstantial as well, where last episode she got a lot of content due to her like being the clear target there and how she had this advantage played on her. And even this episode, like you have her once again finding an advantage and her once again having her name thrown out there, which felt like it had to be there, which is obviously not particularly great. And then you have her using her shot in the dark, which really had no setup, where a lot her talk before Tribal was about using her idol and that she'll have it just in case, but instead she holds on to the idol and uses her shot in the dark instead, which is kind of strange. Though to be fair, I feel like she'll probably explain it at the beginning of next episode, especially considering that Jeff was really propping it up on the On Fire podcast, talking about how it was his really perceptive move, how she was using her shot in the dark to get the reactions and seeing whether she should use her idol in case the shot in the dark failed. So it seems like Jeff is pretty high in this move, even though it didn't really get much setup in the actual episode. Which, to be fair, could be a pro for Rachel in the sense that Jeff seems pretty high on her there. But on the whole, Rachel is someone who I'm still very conflicted on, where on one hand, you can argue a lot of her content in the post-merge has been pretty circumstantial, and obviously her pre-merge was obviously not particularly great either. But on the other hand, she's clearly being set up as this underdog. She has some setup to future relationships with the likes of Saul, for instance. So I think there's definitely legs for Rachel to stand on even after this episode. But I still feel like there are other people I'm higher on at this point, which is why she's here on number 4. Now moving on to number 3. And this person has actually gone down from last week, as I literally had this person number 1 in previous weeks. But number 3, we do have Teeny. And this was not a great episode for Teeny, if I'm being honest, where the bulk of their content is simply them not getting their way, where early on they talk about how they need to target Kyle. He's this easy target if he loses immunity, but then Kyle wins immunity. And then afterwards, we see Teeny talking quite a bit about wanting to keep Sierra, how Sierra is his clear ally for them, and how they need to keep Sierra around, but then they fail to keep Sierra, which is obviously not particularly great there. So really the bulk of Teeny's content is them not getting their way, which is obviously a massive knock there, and not really something I'm looking for in a winner's edit. So I feel like for those reasons alone, I did have to knock Teeny quite a bit for that. And while there was a debate for them still being relatively high, considering I have issues with the top 2 people, if I'm being honest, I feel like considering the fact that Teeny blatantly did not get their way in this episode, was enough to have them here on number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and we have the person who was at number 2 last week, but we do have Andy. And admittedly, I am very conflicted on Andy. At this point, I'm definitely leaning towards him not winning the season, if I'm being honest. I feel like at this point, he's definitely leaning more into the Emily from 45 side of things, as opposed to the Gabler side of things, where we have him like getting the setup to flipping on Sam and Sierra, where he has this big transformation, how he was this really meek kid at the beginning of the game, trying to appease the cool kids. But now that's the merge, he is grown into the cool kid himself, and he's going to take control of the game. And this just screams out Journey Edit to me, where Andy's emergence as this big player is less him being intentionally under the radar and more about him growing and becoming more confident, which is something that very rarely translates to a win. Where I feel like the main thing that I was hoping for with Andy was that he was talking about how his whole strategy was to be under the radar and for him to have analyzed a new era and that it's better to lay low for a lot of the game. But instead, the show is making it clear that he is just like this ball of nerves and he's had to really grow as the game went along. So I'm not feeling the greatest about Andy at this point. I don't love the way that his flip on Sam Sierra is being framed, but it was still pretty clear that he was getting his way here. I mean, it is clear that he was being set up to eventually take out Sam and Sierra, and sure enough, he ends up getting his way there. So again, I feel like Andy is still someone who will be a big player moving forward, but not someone who I'm feeling the greatest about to actually win the game. But considering the rest of the field, I feel like everyone in the game has pretty big holes in their edit, and that naturally leaves Andy relatively high despite my reservations in him actually winning the game. So for those reasons, I do have him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 47 at this point is Caroline. And I was actually surprised that Caroline ended up being number 1 after this week, as I've been pretty conflicted on her for a lot of the season. I feel like there's a lot of questionable content with her, like her not having the flashiest premiere in the world, not really having a set storyline. I feel like another big issue for her is that she talks so much about other people, where even this episode, you have her talking about Genevieve and how Genevieve's playing the game and that that's something that she wanted to do. So Again, I feel like there's just a lot of question marks I have with Caroline as well, which I think have been reflected on this power ranking. And even now, I still feel like there is plenty of room for Caroline to go down. There's plenty of room for other people to emerge. But after thinking about it and after like re-examining some things, I think I kind of had to put Caroline number one, considering that I am lower on Andy and Teeny. I feel like Andy's someone who's clearly being set up to have a journey at it and come up short by the end of it, while Teeny's someone who blatantly did not get their way in this episode. I feel like Caroline is still someone who could have a storyline to win, where I think something to point out is the fact that she is like someone who's underestimated, considering that Gabe is underestimating her. She's also someone that very blatantly wants to bring people together, where that's something that we've been seeing during a lot of the season, where you had the whole thing in episode 5 about her wanting to get Tiana and Gabe to work together and how Tuca needs to sit together. And while I criticized that at the time for it being ineffective, considering that Gabe still was against Tiana by the end of it, I feel like it's at least a spirit there. And I feel like the show wasn't really dunking on Caroline for this effort all that much. And even this episode, like you have her like talking pretty highly about Sue and Genevieve, like these players that are seemingly doing well, and her like being proud of them and not really seeing them as enemies. So I think there's definitely some merit there. Now, I think another knock here is that she doesn't get her way either, where she wanted to target Rachel, doesn't get her way there. Though she does also say that targeting one of the Gatas would be in everyone's best interest, which again, like the fact that she's talking about everyone's collective best interest is probably a good sign there. And again, I feel like with the rest of the field, I feel like considering that a lot of the other people are people I have massive issues with, and Caroline is very much included in that group, and considering that the people who I've had towards the top in previous weeks are all people who I have issues with in this episode, I feel like Caroline has the least amount of issues of those people from this episode. And I feel like considering how the field is still kind of open, I did decide to take a risk and put a new person number one for this week, though I could end up reverting in the future, but we'll have to see. But I feel like for now, considering where things stand, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Caroline is someone who I'll have here at number one. And there we go. That'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the Power Rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm covering other shows such as Hell's Kitchen, Head Chefs Only, so you can expect weekly Power Rankings of that show. I'm on Patreon and have a YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.